Hey Gus, you want to help me out with the next video? Yeah? Yeah, you excited? I think you're going to do a great job. Yeah. Hello again, everyone. So as you may see later in this video, we'll see if this happens or not, I'm not only getting help today from my dog Gus, but also from another furry friend who is actually literally right here. So if you see a tail waving around, you'll know that the cat has found her rightful place in the computer chair, and she will certainly be assisting us with advancing the slides, all that kind of stuff later in the video. So we'll see if we actually see her, or maybe hear from her in just a minute. Today we're talking about reliability, and I want to talk about reliability from a very particular perspective. That's from the perspective of a certain kind of analysis called content analysis. It certainly is not something that every one of you is going to be employing in your own research, but I think it's a very useful one just to give you a sense of sort of how indicators are created from scratch when they do get created from scratch, and how we might be able to assess whether or not they are relatively valid. And so let's get started just thinking about this, right? If we're interested in assessing reliability, we could use a coding scheme as an indicator to generate a variable. And so, again, some of you are going to be having to think about this very explicitly in your own studies. Others of you, it's not going to be very much of an issue because those coding schemes will have already been established, let's say, by survey scientists or whoever it is that's doing the study in the first place. And so, if you're engaged in creating a coding scheme, I think it's important to think about the meaning and especially the reliability of that code. So the example I want to give you today is about the content of tweets. If I were to engage in some kind of content analysis, content analyses are only useful if they have some kind of coding scheme that allows us to then in the future replicate the analysis. So if I have some kind of content analytic scholar, I'm going to want to make sure to provide these rules to people and write them down and put them in my paper, so that if I were to try to, again, replicate this study in the future, it would not be something where I'd have to sort of make up that rule from scratch. I'd be able to move forward by taking the rules that other scholars have used. So I could take this satisfaction or dissatisfaction coding scheme, for example, and say, well, maybe I want to look at how satisfied are people, how dissatisfied are people on the basis of their tweets. So in this case, my data set, my large N data set, would consist of essentially each row would be a tweet. Basically, the unit of analysis for this study would be the tweet. And I would want to code that content and create a variable that would have some numeric score to indicate whether people were satisfied or dissatisfied. So I'm going to develop a coding scheme, and let's see if it's reliable. Let's see if this provides us with the stuff that we need to be successful at that measurement. So my coding scheme goes like this. Each tweet I start at a score of 0. I just take the tweet and I assign a score of 0. Then I adjust the score. I bump it up or I pull it down based on the number of words that contain, in my estimation, positive or negative sentiment. And so really this is the only rule that I have. And so, for example, I might see a tweet that says, "This pizza was disgusting." And I might say, okay, disgusting is a negative word, and so I'm going to assign it a score of -1. And so -1, there's no other words with any sentiment, right? These are just normal words that don't really have sentiment attached to them. And so the tweet overall gets a score of -1. Now, dear viewer, it's your turn. So what I'd like you to do is I'm going to show you 5 tweets, 2 in this slide and 3 in the next one. And I'd like you in both cases to pause the video, and on the basis of that coding rule, just code +1 for every positive word and -1 for every negative word. I want to see what your scores are for these 5 tweets. And in fact, even in the comment section of the YouTube video, you could even reply and you could provide me with your codes. And let's see just as a class how close we get. I think it would be kind of an interesting way to interact. So pause this slide for just a second, take a look at these, try to assign some content codes, and then we'll look at the next 3. Okay, here are the next 3. You can pause this one as well and take a look. I am particularly interested in this thing right here, in the last one on this list. If ever there was a pizza that deserved my highest praise, it would be the delicious, stellar, beautiful oven-baked pizza at True Grits /S. It's a very interesting letter there. I wonder what it could mean. In fact, if I were somebody who spent a lot of time on the internet, which I am, I might have known that this /S is actually something that in many people's lexicons online denotes sarcasm. And so /s could actually indicate, just kidding, I actually don't believe this. And so as a result, maybe your content codes that you just wrote down are substantially altered. So if we were to look, and I'm sure that once we finally get these sort of comment section, YouTube comments going, you'll see that our coding scheme is probably not super reliable, by which I mean that all of you are probably giving very different scores. So this is really the concept of intercoder reliability. The idea being that I want to create a coding rule, I want to create some kind of coding instructions, which will mean that whoever it is out there who picks up my code would be able to take new tweets or take the same tweets and assign scores, and those scores would be generally the same, regardless of who it is that's doing it. Now, of course, my coding rule for this example was extremely limited in its definition, which means that intercoder reliability is almost necessarily going to be really bad. Right? I would need to have a much more robust coding rule to be able to get humans to code my tweets in a way that would get them all closer together, right? So that there's not this sort of variety of interpretations. This is really what we mean when we say that a score is not reliable. It means that there's no single way to assign scores to each case on the basis of the rules that generate those scores. Now again, I want to reassure you, for many of you this is going to be less of an issue than for others. If you're, for example, again, taking your scores from data sets, those things are going to be relatively reliable because they've been produced using professional sort of rules for determining, again, the assignment of each value to each case, which is really what we're talking about here. If you're having to do this from scratch, say that you've got a concept that's new and you want to develop that concept in your paper, this is something that you're going to have to focus on a lot in your study. But regardless, I think it still is something that we should all be thinking about. Whatever it is, whatever numbers we're filling into these rows in our data sets, whatever sort of is occupying each slot in our cases, I think it's really important to just ask that question conceptually, right? Are we getting something that's reliable? Are we getting a score out that we buy? I mean, think back to the Reporters Without Borders scores. If we were to look at those Reporters Without Borders scores, we might want to think to ourselves, does this really make sense to me? Does this really resonate with me as being true scores, right? Is Norway really the most free country in the world in terms of press freedom? Is Turkmenistan the least free? And if we were to look at some of the other examples, do we also buy the ordering of those as well? All of these kinds of questions, I think, open up another universe of questions about the validity of our scores. And that is exactly the subject that we're going to take on next time.